the fundamental question to be asked today in terms of what design and what governance we want to have of our own human project in the 21st century. There is space for us to decide what society and what environment we want to build today and leave to future generations.
The boundary between reality and unreality is becoming blurred, is becoming hard to see. We are losing the sense of reality. We are losing awareness what is real and what is artificially created.
This mixing between physical and digital, analog, digital, online, offline realities could provide a win-win situation. Now, I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but it could happen. Design and governance of the human project, that today has never been a better time to do real, fundamental, significant work to push in the direction, precisely because people feel that everything is a mess.
I'm happy to welcome Professor Luciano Floridi, Professor and Founding Director of Digital Ethics Center at Yale University. Professor Floridi is one of the leading philosophers in the area of digital ethics, philosophy of information, and social impact of digital technology.
Thank you for your kind invitation.
Panie profesorze, if a new Marx, Aristotle, or Kant were born today, they would be fascinated with digital transformation, innovation, and technology. They would create a philosophy of information relevant to contemporary time. I started with your opinion. This is your quotation. We are immersed in digital reality. Do you think that we need philosophy today? And why is connecting the exponential technology with philosophy is important, is necessary today? Let me start from maybe this point, this topic.
Well, you mentioned some great philosophers, and let me make a few points in answering your important question. Philosophers deal with the real world and real problem. We tend to forget, and often we start just studying philosophers as opposed to doing philosophy ourselves. If Aristotle were to be alive today, he would not be studying Wittgenstein. He would be working on our contemporary problems. In the same way as all the other great philosophical thinkers have always engaged with the real world, reality, the pressing problems we have, human nature, human predicament, and human projects. The first point is a reminder that we should be doing philosophy with a catchphrase. We should be working on philosophical problems, not on philosophers' problems. That is the trouble. At some point, we do history of philosophy and we forget the real value of a philosophical engagement with life and reality. The second point is why today philosophy therefore is so important. The real thing, not the history of philosophy, but doing philosophy. Well, because we're going through an extraordinary transformation of our society. It doesn't happen every day that you change the very nature of the world that surrounds you. Now, we move from, people like me, I've seen a world that is and was 100% analog, physical, 3D. You had to use a token to make a telephone call, to a world that is increasingly digital. So the nature of reality is changing. As the nature of reality is changing, so are the interactions between us and among ourselves, between human beings, etc. But it's also changing the nature of politics, the nature of democracy, the nature of business, the nature of entertainment, of science, etc. So it's transforming this digital revolution. Everything we know from A to Z. There's never been a better time to do some philosophical thinking in order to, and that's the last point, why, what for, understand and design. Understand what is happening, because we have a huge conceptual deficit. We're coming into this revolution with tools that we have developed conceptually in the 20th century. And they might or might not have done a good job in the past, but they are certainly not adequate to do a good job today. It's a bit like saying, look, whatever we have inherited in terms of conceptual understanding and framework, etc., is not really good enough today. So we need to develop our own philosophy for the 21st century. But what for? In order to design our future. This is a moment of extraordinary transformations Some are very scary, some are very exciting, but in a moment where everything is changing, that is when you are laying down the foundations of your new society. So right now, we need not only everybody else, but also philosophers to look at the foundations of our society and look at where we want to go with this society and say, look, these are the paths that we could follow. Doing philosophy of our time for our time in order to understand and design better. I think it's a great job.
Thank you very much for structuring your answer. We will talk about scary moment, but also about opportunities. Mr. Professor, you founded philosophy of information, a separate discipline. And how do you define the philosophy of information? And why do we need this?
There are two ways of defining the philosophy of information. One is as a new branch of philosophy. So we have many branches of philosophy of mind, philosophy of mathematics, philosophy of physics, philosophy of art, philosophy of knowledge. There was one missing for obvious reasons. Information has always done an enormous amount of work in philosophy. It's just that it was doing the work behind the scenes. As I mentioned in the past, it was the Cinderella in the castle. Of course, the information revolution, the digital revolution has brought to light something that we have always done. There's always been a philosophy of information. It's just that we were doing it rather than theorizing it. So now, because of the digital revolution, information has become such a crucial concept, something so vital in our understanding of ourselves and the world, that it is crucial to do more theoretical work. So concentrating on this particular concept, what is information and the implications of its proper creation, management, moderation, and so on. So that is the general field. But I say two ways, because then in that general field, there are specific positions. So imagine, for example, you talk about philosophy of language. Philosophy of language is a branch of philosophy. But then there's the philosophy of language of Wittgenstein, which is very different from the philosophy of language of Gadamer. So that's what I mean by saying that we need a specific philosophy of information within the general field. As a general field, I'm happy not to have established this as an important area of research. Now, of course, I have my own specific philosophy of information, but other people will have their own, which is good. Philosophers tend to provide more variety, more ideas, more competition between views. In my view, the philosophy of information that I practice should be at the beginning or the foundation of the human project. So trying to understand more deeply the information society, not just in order to see what is critical and what is not working, or what is working but could work better, but also in view of casting a project, having a sense of goal and end. My philosophy of information is, if you like, more ethical and political than other people might actually develop.
We'll talk about ethical infrastructure later on, but before I would like to ask you about concept of Infosphere. I know that you introduced this concept indeed. And how do we define it? I remember that in your book, in the Fourth Revolution, you explained Infosphere is reshaping human reality. It's changing understanding of our place in world. Why, Mr. Professor?
A small premise, when you do some philosophy, especially about new topics, sometimes you have to design or invent, shape your own vocabulary, because we don't have the words to discuss this. Infosphere are the terms on life or Fourth Revolution. We will discuss infraethics in a moment. They're just labels. What they should be useful to handle the concepts that lie behind. The concept behind Infosphere is the view of digital revolution and the information society as an environmental transformation. Is not just about communication. In the 90s, we misunderstood, I should say, they misunderstood. A few philosophers, myself included, kept saying that they were wrong, but politicians, lawmakers misunderstood the information revolution, the digital transformation of our society, as a communication transformation. And they thought that it was more like the telegram, the TV, the radio, the internet. They did not understand that it was actually transforming our environment, how we live, how we interact. So I needed a word to talk about a full environment that is made of analog and digital, that is made of online and offline. And so I came up with this keyword here, but it really means the whole world. So if you like, it means the room in which you are, the room in which I am, but also this communication that we're having. Now, if anyone were to walk into the room and say, are you online or are you offline? Clearly I'm offline, and you are in your desk, but clearly we're also online. So the vocabulary needs to be updated. Infosphere is the environment which every advanced society, the one we enjoy in Europe, now spends most of its time.
I'm not going to put our discussion in a theoretical frame, but I have to ask about ethical infrastructure. You're also author of this concept. This is an infrastructure, as I understand, which supports ethical human development. Mr. Professor, how do you define this concept in today, let me say, AI-driven world? And can ethical infrastructure help us build a better, maybe more fair, more just digital society? Let's talk about opportunities.
Yeah. So this is important because I think ethics has underestimated or has not paid enough attention to the fact that we're not talking just about values in our society. Often we talk about opportunities, affordances, constraints, rules that are in themselves, they're not good or bad, but they make good or bad emerge more easily. Let me give you an analogy so that we clarify the point quite clearly. Imagine that ethics has always spoken about clean water, drinkable water, the risk of poisoning water, etc. The infra-ethics or the infrastructure for ethics is the pipes. It's like saying, look, you could have the best values in the world, the greatest democracy, but if the infrastructure of our society, the way in which people expect to interact, is rusty, leaking, broken, well, those values will go nowhere. At the same time, if you have just the infrastructure, imagine only the pipes in the house, but the water is poisonous. The best rules, the best infrastructure will still kill people. So what we need is both. In the analogy, we need good pipes, so good infrastructure that facilitates,
Interesting comparison.
improves, and good water. Now, ethics concentrates a little bit too much on good water values, for example, justice. But justice without a society that makes justice work, that makes justice prevail, that makes justice the ultimate goal, it's a dead sort of value. They say, oh, we have justice, yes, but it never makes any difference. At the same time, for example, something like the rule of law, one of the sort of infrastructures that we normally talk about, it could be the worst thing possible if the values, say in a Nazi Germany, there was plenty of rule of law, but the values were horrific, were catastrophic. They were the worst thing that we ever seen on this planet. So again, good pipes, but no, terrible contents meant that, no, we were poisoning our society. So in my work, I've been stressing not just the importance of values, but also the importance of all the circumstances, the infrastructure that make those values make a positive difference. The pipes, not just the water.
Yes, Professor, last year I interviewed Tomasz Zawiszyński. He is well-recognized Polish philosopher, and he emphasized that the boundary between reality and unreality is becoming blurred, is becoming hard to see. We are losing the sense of reality. We are losing awareness what is real and what is artificially created. According to him, this is the greatest danger we face. And I'm just wondering, what is the biggest threat we are currently facing, according to Professor Floridi?
Yeah, no, it's a great colleague and he raises an important issue. I think things are complicated, as they say. On the one hand, we are mixing real and virtual,
Yes.
digital and analog, online and offline. That's the new world in which we live. Yes. Second point, it doesn't have to be something negative. It could be something very positive. It could be something that, for example, expands, improves, enlarges our experiences. The very fact that we can have this interview ourselves today, that is something that would not have been possible in the past, for obvious reasons. So there's much more and much better that we could do. I'm not saying that we're doing it, but we could do. This mixing between physical and digital, analog, digital, online, offline realities could provide a win-win situation. Now, I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but it could happen. The thing that seems to me more critical is not so much the mixing, but the disappearance of, say, the physical, natural, real world behind the screen of a digital interface. This is something that is happening everywhere, and we know that it's a huge risk. Let me give you a couple of examples. In healthcare, in education, and in human resources, so business, what we really deal with is the profile, digital profile of an individual. We forget sometimes that there is someone behind. A clear example, if you go to a hospital, it takes 7 steps from the X-ray of your lungs to someone who says, this is, for example, a problem, medical problem. Of these 7 steps, the only step that actually interacts with the patient is number 1. The other 6, they are all digital. Now, that is the risk of losing sight of the analog. I call it the eclipse of the analog. Now, it's a risk, but we need to understand one fundamental point. First, this is not a criticism of the digital. It's not about saying, oh, digital technology is just a disaster, everything goes badly. Not true. It is a warning saying, if we want to have the win-win situation, which I sketched at the beginning, we need to make a big effort. It's not enough to have the profile of a student, a patient, or a worker and say, that's all I need. I can change this or change that. We need to keep interacting with the source. So the difference here between the system, the reality, and the model of the system. If we stop at the model of the system, which is digital, we lose sight of the system and the endless amount of information that can provide. Bottom line, yes, it's a risk. Yes, we are running that risk, but going backwards, as in let's not unplug, remove the digital, that's a mistake. The digital technologies are there to help us to do this much better. It is our fault if we stop halfway through and say, oh, look, it's all a mix. I just look at, say, the screen. I never meet the person. If that happens, it's human responsibility. So we need a better ethics, but we need to move forward, not backwards.
Let's talk maybe about privacy, because I know that this is a topic which you have covered also. Professor Luciano Floridi emphasized in the age of surveillance capitalism, let me quote, we have the right to speak in the first person as the authors of our futures. But the surveillance capitalists took away our right to the future and to our own future time. And I'm just thinking aloud. Do you believe that it's still possible to truly protect our privacy?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the quote today you had is, shall we say, made to catch our attention. The truth is obviously way more complex and articulate. Certainly, for example, in Europe, we should not read too many American books when the American books forget that the world is not just the United States. Even more so these days. If we look at the wider world, first of all, there are many concepts of privacy. What looks like privacy in Japan is a different concept than what looks privacy in Brazil. Second, there are plenty of rules and laws. Now, our American colleagues are obviously not accustomed to this kind of European protection, and so they forget about the fact that there is, as I said, a European Union that takes care of this. We're lucky. We're lucky to live in a Europe that has been working really hard to make sure that privacy is protected. Having said all this, we also need to acknowledge not only the variety, not only that there's a bigger world out there, not only the presence of robust, really robust legislation about protection of privacy, the GDPR and everything else, but also privacy is changing. What privacy meant for my grandmother, who thought that, kissing in the street was outrageous, and what it means for, say, my nieces, for whom privacy is, you have no right to look at my iPhone. If you look at my iPhone, that is a breach of my privacy. Clearly, things have changed dramatically. So let's not get stuck with a single concept of privacy, an American concept of the lack of privacy and the lack of acknowledgement of rules and customs. Now, with all this in the background, I agree that privacy is a matter of not so much ownership of my data, but special relationship with my identity. That's why the European legislation is much more advanced and much more philosophically well-grounded. If you look at the approach from Europe to privacy, it's not in terms of economics, it's in terms of personal identity. I am my own information, and therefore the protection of my information is the protection of my self-identity. It's not the protection of like my books, my house, my car, my bank. Now, of course, from an American perspective, which works much more in terms of competition law, antitrust, and ownership, they get to protection of privacy from a different angle. Sometimes the result is the same. If you look at state, not federal, but a state-based legislation, especially in California, California adopted like a photocopy of the GDPR. So once again, if you look at the United States, look at state by state. Don't just look at the generic sort of zeitgeist. It is true that if, like a colleague, you look only at Washington, only at the lack of legislation, only at one concept of privacy, and only at zero understanding of the rest of the world, then you end up with those stories. Truth is, as I said, much more complex. Having said all this, let's make sure that we lead by example in Europe and show the rest of the world, as we have with the GDPR and as we are doing now with the AI Act, how good rules and good innovation can go hand in hand. But it is a firm line on legislation. We need that legal framework. And Europe is doing a fantastic job there. It can be improved. We can do better. But we're certainly leading there, and in a good way, by looking at what society we want to live in. Let's say that I agree on the final point that privacy is a precious thing that we have discovered. Digital technologies can challenge that a lot. Good regulatory frameworks compensate for the lack of privacy or the breach of privacy, but they need to be implemented, and they need to be implemented properly and quickly. In Europe, we're doing a sufficiently good job. We could do better, of course, much better. But we have already started moving in the right direction. I'm afraid I would recommend to our American colleagues to get out of Washington.
Panie profesorze, in Poland we are discussing that human-centric approach to thinking about technologies is right now essential. And in my previous interviews, my previous guests emphasized that we should bring humanism to the first place, to the forefront, because it's the value, I would say, more important than we realize. Why should the human perspective be at the core of the, say, fast-paced technological world?
Spice up the discussion with touch of disagreement. This is backward looking. Once again, it's not looking at the 21st century with open, innovative eyes. I come from Italy. Of course, Renaissance and humanism, you take them with mom's milk, so to speak, of course. So inevitably, humanist approach, how can that possibly go wrong? There's nothing wrong with that. But there's nothing right either. It's old-fashioned. Think about it. Because we have destroyed the world, nature, by putting ourselves at the center of nature all the time. If you keep thinking in terms of human-centric only approach to the world, which I know is presented as opposed to technology-centric, obviously you cannot wrong with that. But if we just concentrate only on us, humanity, at the center of the universe, we are going to destroy this planet more quickly than we already have. So what we need to do is to put ourselves at the periphery, meaning that we should really be a little bit more careful about past generations, future generations, and the environment. Now, this means putting oneself at the service of the other, not at the center. So I know that everybody who speaks about human-centric approach to technology means well. I understand that. And I share the point, but I don't think it's good enough. We can do better than that. We can do more. It's necessary but insufficient. The sufficiency comes with being at the service of the current generation the future one, and the environment. If you think about this, and I'm no longer Catholic, but I grew up in Rome, so inevitably some Catholic culture stays with you.
Yes.
But as a former Catholic, obviously this comes with much alignment with the New Testament. When Jesus decides to wash the feet of his followers, he's not putting himself at the center, he's putting himself at the service. Now, if Jesus, and it was Jesus, could put himself at the service of the others, surely humanity can do a little bit of that. So what I'm talking about here is, yes, humanism, yes, human-centric, but you know what? That is so yesterday. We need to step forward. We need to put ourselves in a position of altruistic responsibility, which, as every mom and dad, as every teacher, as every good business person has always realized, means not me at the center, but the children at the center, the customers at the center, the world at the center. I'm almost there. So who is at the center? Me, you, etc. There is one final step. We should put the relationship at the center. So Romeo and Juliet, just go classic Shakespeare. It's not Romeo and it's not Juliet at the center of the relationship. It's their love that is at the center of the relationship. So between us and nature, between us and future generations, between us and past generations, what is at the center? The relationship that we have between you and me, between us, humanity that lives now, and the past humanity, the future humanity, between us and the world. At that point, nobody comes first, but the relationship between, say, nature and humanity, between history and culture, between science and humanities. Now we're talking 21st century. A relational ontology, to be serious, that takes into account the counterbalance between different elements. So between, say, the doctor and the patient, who is at the center? The relationship that they have between the two. Between the client and the lawyer, between A and B, is how they are linked together that both should be taken care of. Then we're having a conversation. We finally enter into the 21st century. Otherwise, we're just looking backwards, saying, oh, I wish we were in the Renaissance or some humanism and human-centric, etc. Those are empty words. They're not going to make a difference. We're not going to engage with the problems we have today if we still think in terms of modernity. We need to move forward. We cannot be just postmodern. We need to be something else. We need to be our own philosophy and therefore our own way of thinking. That's why I said I'm not so sure I agree.
Mr. Professor, so we have to rethink our relations with technology, how we shape our relations with technology. How do you see this?
The technologies that we have developed are quintessentially relational ontologies. They build the world in the interactions in which we operate. They essentially provide the network within which we, as nodes, operate other nodes. Having a ethical addition to or with technology means making sure that technology does the best for humanity, but humanity uses at its best technology. So once again, it's not technology at the center or humanity. It's how the two interact, the equilibria that we're going to find. We need to work on equilibrium. So in any things in terms of society, which party should be winning and which party should be losing. In a democracy, there is no such thing. In a true democracy, no party loses. There are parties who have the power to govern. But the fact that one party wins, it doesn't mean that it crushes the party that loses. That's why when a party or a prime minister or, say, a president is elected, the first thing that he says is, I will be the president of everybody, not just my own people. And the first thing that the other candidate says is, I concede that the other candidate has won. I concede. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a relational way of understanding politics. It's not a football game. If you think in terms of football game, like winner takes everything, takes all, and is either I win or you win, etc., then we really have the end of democracy, which is the protection. It's not the win, not the giving everything to those who win, but protecting those who lose. That is the democracy in which you want to live, where the losers don't lose everything. Now, these are just examples of a relational way of thinking in terms of interactions, where instead of saying A or B and who is at the center, you look at how they interact and the relationship is at the center, so that both A and B can contribute to make the relation work. Now, anyone who's ever been married knows very well, it's not he or she or they, etc. It's the marriage that you need to make work. And of course, both need to contribute. So it's not that, say, for example, with my wife is at the center and I'm at the periphery, or vice versa. We're both at the periphery. What is at the center is our marriage. And that's why it is working. A marriage that puts only one of the two at the center, it's not the kind of marriage you want to really enjoy. It can work, but it doesn't work as well as the one that puts everybody at the periphery and the relationship at the center. Now, that is also what we learn from the New Testament. The relationship between God and humanity puts the interaction between humanity and God at the center of the relationship. That's why we have the New Testament. Whereas the Old Testament tends to be a little bit more God-centered.
The focus on the relationship is a bit surprising for me, to be honest. I'm surprised, but I know that you moved, as we emphasized on the very beginning, you moved from Oxford to University to Yale. Right now we are maybe close to a big tech world, let me say. And I'm just wondering, what are the differences between, let me say, European and the American style of thinking, how technology can serve humanity, humans, what would you say?
We can use a little Kant here, Immanuel Kant. We all know that he has this beautiful way of presenting always an end, we have it as a means to an end. And I think that if I had one thing that I wish digital companies would do, would be exactly that. They should be all Kantian. They should be serving humanity as opposed to using humanity for the means. So imagine, for example, privacy. We discussed it.
Yes.
Why the privacy? Why you are okay with the local law, knowing exactly where you like, the local bar. You are in Rome. I'm from. You go to always to the same place, and they know exactly the kind of coffee you like, how you like it, And the guy at the bar, oh, Luciano, the usual, yes, thank you. Why are you happy? That privacy is gone. He knows everything about your coffee taste. But why is that okay? Because he doesn't use it for its own end. He's not making you a means to an end. He's actually helping you to have a better coffee. That's simply fine. In other words, he's not using humanity as just a means, but he's using humanity or treating humanity as an end. The end game is to give you a better experience of cappuccino or coffee. Now imagine digital companies thinking in terms of how can I make the channel, etc., happier with the service? Not how I make more money, but how can I provide a better, more satisfying, more enriching, more pleasant experience when they go online and do this and this and that? They would not treat humanity as an end, not just as a means. Unfortunately, this is not happening. It doesn't happen enough. So on the usual media, for example, you find that you are just a bunch of data that can be packaged for advertisement or a customer, which is interesting only in terms of purchasing power, how much that person can spend. Now, if I'm just a source of data or money, clearly I'm just a means to an end. What's the end? Profit. If you put profit as the end and humanity as a means towards profit, this is not the world in which you want to live. Vice versa. If we were to put profit as a means to treat humanity as always as an end, then that would be amazing. If we connect this to the previous question, what other ends are there? Past generations, future generations, and environment. So we've got four. If a company, a digital company, were to put past, future, present generation, and the environment as an end, as opposed to a means to their profit, what would be amazing. This is why sometimes we say some of the things we have in the world should not be owned by private hands, because a private company will pursue profit above anything else. That's why sometimes it's a good idea to have the state, society, the group, the collective, the community own that particular quote unquote business, because it means that it can actually take care of it in a Kantian way. Now, philosophically speaking, I believe that this is doable. Practically, we need better regulation. That's why you need constraints and incentives and disincentives, so that business not only generates a lot of wealth, but also does that in a Kantian way, minding humanity always as an end, never only as a means. It's doable, but we're not doing it. But I believe it could be done, especially in Europe.
Okay. I see. I know that you focus on governance, ethical, legal, and social implications of digital technologies. What are your current priorities?
So at the moment, we're concentrating quite a lot, inevitably, on AI, artificial intelligence, because it's making the biggest impact. One of the, if not the only priority, but an important priority is, say, methodology. I sketched this before in one of the questions, is trying to understand as early as possible what new problems are coming our way. In other words, what challenges are visible at the horizon. And instead of waiting for those problems to become huge, insurmountable, costly, etc., trying to anticipate.
Predict, yes.
So philosophy
in advance
also as a way of understanding better today, so that you can start looking into the future. And I'm not talking about sci-fi in 100 years. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5 years from now. What is going to happen? So let me give you a couple of examples. Some of the projects we're working on are the future of content is being transformed profoundly by the AI revolution.
Yes.
In fact, I was saying that the biggest impact of the AI revolution is in the future of content.
Yes.
Production, manipulation, distribution, consumption is extraordinary, much more than many other things. So understanding what is going to happen to content, meaning, for example, entertainment, but also scientific content, literary content, artistic content, that is a challenge that we should address as early as possible. It's already here, but surely we don't want to wait until it becomes
materialize. Yes.
Exactly. So one way of putting it is that I try to work like a dentist who always recommends prevention, because if you don't floss and you don't brush, you're going to see me when it's going to be very painful. That's what I normally tell the companies. Act now on what we're telling you, because this is not going away. And by the time you feel the pain, it will be really dramatic. Now it looks like a problem that we can solve easily. Tomorrow or the day after, I have to pull the whole tooth. Before getting there, for example, content is one of those problems. Before we get into a complete mess with copyright, intellectual property, distribution, new business models, etc., act now, because this is visible. A bit of good philosophy and a bit of good science and humanities and so on, a bit of good STEM, etc., will provide you a good vision, which then becomes a project. You don't react to problems. You anticipate them and find ways of either minimizing, bypassing, solving ahead, etc. So these are some of the priorities, but I can give you more. Everything is on the website anyway for anyone who's interested in working on this. But for example, what is the aftermath of the implementation of the AI Act in Europe? There's a lot of areas there. For example, simulation, risk assessment, auditing. We're working on that. I can give you more examples in terms of looking at something that at the moment we're not discussing anymore because AI is there, but it will come back. Metaverse, virtual reality, etc.
Yes.
We could, remember, last example, it takes many years to formulate a good piece of legislation, and rightly so. I mean, these are complex frameworks. 7, 8 years of real hard work in Brussels to get to, for example, the GDPR, the AI, etc. Now, we could start now preparing a piece of legislation on the metaverse, virtual reality. So something like the VR Act. It's obvious that sooner or later we will need it. It's not going to go away, but we're not doing it. So some of the push is, especially in Brussels, etc. It's like, look, why don't we start a discussion? Now it's easy. We are relaxed. There is no pressure. There is no business not breathing on your neck. and we can do it with some leisure. You know what's going to happen? We will not do it. We will wait until this thing becomes, once again, it hits the headlines, and then we say, oh my goodness, we had to rush. Let's do something. So the job is to try to understand, anticipate problems, design solutions, and tell the policymakers, the decisions makers, and the lawmakers, all makers, look, these are problems that you should really take care of now. Because now is easy. In the future, it will be painful. Unfortunately, philosophers are not well known for being heard when they speak, but no, that's the job.
Anticipate and assess the risks. This is the most
Exactly.
challenging from my perspective part of your work. You mentioned about the perspective of 3-4 years. It's a huge period of exponential technologies.
It's difficult, but some of the things that, so it's not trying to predict the future as if you have a crystal ball. That is impossible and it's ridiculous. Anyone will ask the question, oh, can you guess what the world will be in 5 years?
No, it's not a matter of
Trust me,
guessing.
possible. But what it is possible are two other things out of three. Guessing the future? No. Building the future now? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do it now. And then that's exactly what you're going to find tomorrow. It's a bit like putting the right seeds in the garden. Guess what? The next year, you will have roses. And making sure that what you can see, I said three things, not trying to guess, putting the seeds now and understanding what is already developing now. Because if you have a little plant like this and it's called an oak tree, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's going to become a huge tree. It's an oak tree. So that's the way it's going to go. That's the analogy with the garden again. So there are things that put in place by us now. That's one way of handling the future. And there are things that are developing as we speak. We can see them around us. Content and AI, for example. We can also work towards shaping the future. What we should stop doing completely, and trust me, that's what everybody wants to do, is guess the future. Oh, what the world would be like in 20 years? That is a silly question. Let me give you an example. Imagine it's 1925.
1925.
1925, 100 years ago. And someone asks you what the world will be like in 30 years. 1955. Who would have ever guessed correctly? A new world war, Cold War, atomic bombs, you name it. So why should we be any better now? There is no way of guessing the future, but we should stop guessing and we should start designing the future now. There is no future as such. It's an open web page. It's like saying, taking a closed book and say, what's written in the last page? That's what is written. Nothing. We're writing now. So you want to have that future? Now is the time to change it. Look at the trends and look at the things you want to put in place. Then we're talking about something serious. Guessing the future as if it were a Netflix series and you want to guess what is in the third season, that's it.
Today I've noticed one of quotation of Kevin Kelly, the best way to predict future is to create future.
Of course.
Yes.
It's well known. It's just that we don't want to make the effort. We want to be lazy. Oh, if only I could guess what the future will be like, I could invest today in the right way so that, but that's childish way of thinking.
What fundamental question or questions should we ask ourselves today, just living in a world of intelligent technologies?
Yeah, I think that to me, at least in the way I'm developing my own way of thinking these days, I could summarize the fundamental question to be asked today in terms of what design and what governance we want to have of our own human project in the 21st. It's imagining that there is space for us to decide what society and what environment we want to build today and leave to future generations. And by environment, there are whole thing. I don't mean just the garden and the street, the office and the forest. Also the digital, the Infosphere at large, as we mentioned before. So imagine all the environments in which we spend our time. It could be the house, it could be the office,
Yes.
it could be the garden, the park, digital, so communication, online, Infosphere, etc. every environment, we have a chance and a significant chance to shape those environments in the right direction. That's what I call the human project. What kind of human project we want to put in place, and then, so design, and then how we want to control it, that's governance. So design and governance of the human project, that today has never been a better time to do real, fundamental, significant work to push in the direction, precisely because people feel that everything is a mess. Exactly for that reason. Everything is moved. Everything seems to be fluid. There seems to be no final constraints, limits, hardcore boundaries, which is scary. But at the same time, it means that in this magmatic, fluid, changing world, we can give shape to it. If you wear like a piece of cement, there's nothing you can do about it. This is malleable. The society in which we live right now, Europe included, open to change, which of course is upsetting, unsettling. There are no certainties. But look at the other side. Lack of certainties means that you can build new certainties.
Yes.
That you can give shape to a world that is changing as we speak. So what shapes do we want to give to this world? And therefore, what human project, what design, what governance? If we could put everything in 100 pages, a manual for the human project, its design and governance, I would give anything to see that book or that little manual and read it, because that's what we need today. Now, that to me is the pressing question for our time.
What kind of digital society do we want to create to our future generation? This is, for me, the ultimate question, which is the conclusion from our discussion. If the digital future is to be our home, then we have to build it. This is quotation and opinion of Shoshana Zuboff, which I've noted as the summary of our interviews. Pani Profesorze, thank you very much for your time. I am delighted. I'm happy that I can meet you here in Warsaw. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thanks a lot.